Once upon a time there was a great kingdom. Its ruler was known around the globe. Poets wrote about his empire and explorers came from around the world to see for themselves. For centuries this place represented all that was wonderful and yet somehow forbidden about Central Asia. But that was then and this is now. The modern country is less dreamy and more nightmarish. Giant walled monoliths where the public fear to tread. A state which has a crawling paranoia about enemies without and within. This is a country where a mother's only son is dragged away in the middle of the night for speaking Arabic, where people are in hiding for protesting about a lack of electricity, where they say there are police spies in the mosques checking for too much religious devotion. This is Uzbekistan. The Orange Revolution in Ukraine changed all sorts of things in this part of the world because suddenly governments left, right and centre were faced with an uncomfortable truth that their hold on power too might not be anything like as strong as they thought it was. Some have tried to reform at least a little bit to hang on to power, but here they decided to do something else instead, systematically to crush every single sign of dissent with an iron fist. This is the story about how Uzbekistan is on the way to becoming a failed state. Thankfully, there's still a little bit of Samarkand in the capital, Tashkent, to break up the otherwise relentless monotony. There's some amazing stuff in here. The only remaining edition of a Quran from the 7th century, for one thing. It used to be a madrasa, a religious school, but now it's the home of Uzbekistan's board of Muslims, who walk the tightrope of preaching to the 80% of the population here who are Islamic, while dealing with an autocratic president who sees his country as a secular state. Our religious activists use every opportunity in the mosques and madrasas and through the media to explain to people the difference between terrorism and pure Islam. Our activists explain to everyone, especially the young, about the relationship between the government and the religious board. It's certainly understandable that the government does want to keep a lid on radical Islam when you consider that there's a swathe of the country that wants to run Uzbekistan under Sharia law. This year, some of their supporters tried to storm a jail in a town called Andijan. The army moved in and wiped out hundreds, mostly innocents, in what's widely held to have been a massacre. The aim, undoubtedly, was to crush an Islamic revolution.
I'm sure that government is really worried because the Andijan lessons, it's really big lessons. And I'm assuring you that the government is making some measures to prevent some another kind of events in other regions, parts of Uzbekistan.
But where does stability end and persecution begin? Away from the police spies, you can find women who tell of their sons being taken in the night by the secret police, imprisoned on terrorism charges while having no political affiliation.
After MVD and SMB heard that he knows Arabic words, so therefore they gave him 12 years.
12 years?
12 years.
Your son is in prison for 12 years?
Yes, 12 years. Every day they beat him. Now I don't know now how he feels himself.
More than 100 people have been rounded up and put on trial for Andijan, where we found the judge pronouncing them guilty well before the end of the trial. Once convicted, they'll take a bullet in the head. But many others were there whose involvement is far less clear-cut. We found these men over the Uzbek border in Kyrgyzstan, in hiding for fear of their lives. We were standing in the square and then the government forces started shooting. We ran away, but still I lost 2 of my brothers. In all, our family lost 10 people. Bullets were flying everywhere. We just lay on the floor covering our heads. People were being shot in the head, shattered into pieces. They said they were there because they'd heard the president was coming and wanted to complain about a lack of water and electricity. But the situation now is a disaster. They're terrified of telling anyone who they are for fear that there are Uzbek police spies in their neighbourhood who would shop them back to their government and almost certain death. They're desperate for asylum and resigned to never seeing their families again. The United Nations reckons there could be thousands in their position.
The problem is that there is no other way to protect them without these people surfacing and contacting the Department for Migration Service, which then will register the case, and then the person will be legally protected from forced return to Uzbekistan.
Andijan seems to have become an opportunity for the Uzbek government to condemn anyone who criticised them on any level. Some of the very few journalists who covered the story were accused of supporting terrorism. This woman, a freelance for the World Service, had to flee the country to seek asylum in Germany.
The state prosecutor accused me of knowing the situation and that I said that 4,000 people were ready for an armed uprising. It's all lies. My colleagues and I were reporting honestly and objectively.
You're not supposed to joke about it, eh? Still, if you're beaten, you might as well smile. This is an old friend of mine who tried to run an organisation to teach Uzbeks about a free press. When we turned up, they were being closed down, prosecuted by the Uzbek courts for acting against the government.
If you constantly harass journalists and the organisations that they work for, eventually people give up because it's too dangerous. If you're beaten up or threatened with being beaten up or threatened with the loss of your job or your relatives won't be able to work, I mean, most people aren't that brave.
Try to film here openly and they want your tapes off you. You have to hide in the trees to get something said. Uzbekistan does still have two friends in Russia and China who have absolutely no complaints about this country's stance on human rights. But as far as the West is concerned, senior diplomats from both Britain and America who we spoke to say there is now no policy further than waiting for President Karimov to die and hoping that something better happens after that. How ironic that Uzbekistan gained a reputation like that of Zimbabwe or Burma through trying to fight radical Islam. But they dragged so much else down with it, it's now hard to see how they can find a way back. Lawrence Lee, Sky News in Uzbekistan. Lawrence Lee, 5 News in Uzbekistan.